I'd like to tell you about a free app that I've been using from Enverus Energy Link called Mineral IQ. Mineral IQ enables you to view monthly income, track earnings trends, and download pay stubs. It also provides in-depth valuation information you can use to make confident decisions when to sell or what to buy. It even tracks surrounding rig and permit activity and provides you with that data on a weekly basis. One Mineral IQ user said, "I had just inherited some income on a well, and Mineral IQ's appraisal feature gave me the confidence to hold on to my interest instead of selling it at the wrong price." If you aren't already signed up, be sure to visit www.mineraliq.com today to get started. Again, that's Mineral IQ to get started for free today. And I would encourage everyone to check it out. I've been really impressed with the Mineral IQ platform. And since it's free, what are you waiting for?
Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your mineral rights and royalties. And we're covering in a special video series how to navigate each of the major oil and gas producing state commission websites. And so in this first video, we're going to cover Texas. Oil and gas is regulated by the Texas Railroad Commission. So we're going to dive into how to use the GIS viewer, in other words, map viewer, to look at oil and gas wells and property descriptions. And so you can identify where your property is located relative to any wells that might be proposed. And Justin, this is a really useful skill that every mineral and royalty owner should know how to do.
You said it, Matt. And these websites are not always the most user-friendly. And so being able to see exactly how to navigate that and find the relevant information is really valuable. I know I struggle with that initially with the GIS viewer.
Yeah, so to just dive in, if you need to find Texas, you could just Google Texas RRC GIS, and it should take you to this link here, or you can enter rrc.texas.gov and navigate over to the GIS viewer. And when you log into this for the first time, you'll see a map that's zoomed out showing all of the state of Texas and then the different regions within the state of Texas. These are just the different Railroad Commission districts or regions, and you really don't need to worry too much about that. What I'm going to show you is how to search by the legal description, and shout out to Justin, who actually showed me this for the first time. This is sort of a shortcut that you can use to locate your property on the map without having to zoom in. Now, that's obviously one other option. So if you have, for example, mineral interest in Midland County, you can zoom into Midland County. And if you know which part of the county it is, you can just keep zooming in, and eventually it'll show the blocks and sections. Here, if I come in with a tight enough zoom, there we go. And you can see the survey abstract number, and you can see the well locations and all that stuff. And so, assuming you know how to do that, that's definitely one way you can navigate to your particular property. If you don't know where it is located, you just know the legal description. Let's say you recently inherited this mineral interest and you have a deed or you have an oil and gas lease, there'll be what's called a legal description. And if you don't know how to read a legal description, we're not going to go over how to do that in this video. That is something that I recommend all mineral and royalty owners know how to do so that you can identify where your property is located, so that if any wells get proposed or if you are proposed an oil and gas lease, you know exactly what you're leasing. And if you don't know how to do that, I cover that in detail in my Mineral Management Basics course. So we'll link to that course in the show notes for this episode if you're listening to this. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, here you can find a link below for that course. People know the legal description. It's a very, legalese type writing on a deed or a lease. You don't really know where it's located. In Texas, I would say, is particularly difficult. What's your experience been trying to find this stuff in Texas?
That if I did not have the search by survey, I think it would be very difficult to actually locate those minerals. But thank goodness they make it easy to not only locate it by that legal description, but then to be able to obtain the abstract number, which makes it even easier for the future.
Yeah, and what Justin is referring to, this search by survey, if you look at the Texas Railroad Commission website, there's a little magnifying glass at the top of the screen. And if you mouse over that or click on that, you'll see you can search by pipelines, surveys, lease ID, CWD sites, and discharge permits. And what we're looking for here is the surveys. We're looking at how do we search by the legal description, and that's what you will pull up when you click on the magnifying glass. And Texas is particularly interesting because it has 3 different survey systems. So depending on where the property is located in the state, it can be described by, for example, the block and section, or it could be a meets and bounds description. It all kind of goes back to the Spanish history and legacy of the state of Texas, which we cover a lot more, like I said, in my mineral management basics course. But assuming you know the legal description, it's very easy to locate it on a map using this survey search. And again, what I'm doing is I'm clicking on the magnifying glass icon at the top of the page, and there is a list of different ways to search. What I'm interested in is the survey. And what you do is you enter the county that you're interested in. In this case, I'm looking for Glasscock County. And let's say I don't know the abstract number. And so what Justin was referring to, that abstract number is a unique number within that county that just identifies that particular section or portion of a section. And so that's an easy way to pinpoint that tract of land that you're interested in. But most legal descriptions on a deed don't include the survey abstract number. So what you're looking for would be the survey name, the block, and the section. And in this case, I know that I'm interested in the T&P Railroad survey. And that survey name is important because it will differentiate within that survey the specific block and section. So Texas is, like I said, very complicated, but just know you need to know at least the survey name, the block, and the section, or the abstract number. In this case, I'm looking for Block 33, Township 2 South, or T2S. And so you can kind of look here on the right. It tells you a little bit of the naming convention that is used. And in this case, Section 27. So I'm going to query that. And sure enough, here's my section in question. And if I were to zoom out a little bit, you can see there's Block 33, T2S. And, there's a lot of wells. These little green dots are all wells. And if I hover my mouse over them, it'll tell me more about the operator, the field, the status of the well. So the symbol will also tell you more about the status. And if it's got a line through it, it tells you that it's a plugged oil well. If it's just a solid green dot, then it's a producing well. And it'll tell you if it's oil or gas. Gas is typically red with a little starburst kind of symbol. And then a well permit is like a blue circle not filled in. So Justin, if I were to own mineral rights in this Section 27, this would be good news.
That. And this is something that I make a habit of trying to check this regularly for my properties to kind of stay aware. And man, a really great tool on the GIS is on the left-hand side here, you have that legend. And I know it took me some time to really go through and learn what all these icons mean, but this map makes it really easy to know, okay, is there a permitted location? And to get to the information about that permitted location.
Yeah, that's a great point. So again, if you're listening to this on the podcast, highly encourage you to watch the YouTube video because we're going to walk through this step by step, and it'll be easier to sort of understand what kind of information is available by seeing it firsthand. Like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But, once I've identified that section, and let's say I want to click in on one of these wells, there's a little eye with a white circle, and that's just the identify action. And what I'm going to select is wells. And whenever I were to hover over a particular well and click on it, it'll pull up a window that shows me more information about that well. And that including the latitude and longitude, the API number. And when you look on the Texas Railroad Commission, one thing to note, Justin, this is something that if you're not familiar with this, it can be difficult to find your well searching by API. And that is another way that you can identify a well. On the top right of the screen, you can see that there's a find well API or address. And within the state of Texas, the first 2 digits are 42. And the API number, again, I go through this in more detail in the mineral management basics course, but there's a state, county, and then there's a unique well identifier. Well, the first 2 digits are the state. And by definition, everything that's on the Texas Railroad Commission website is located in the state of Texas. So they only include the last digits of the API number. So the first 3 are the county, and then the last 5 are the unique well identifier. And so that combination of those 8 digits, that's what you would need to enter. So you would need to omit the 42 and then enter in the rest of the API number up here. And then it'll also zoom in on that particular well for you if that's another way that you want to search for this. If you know the API number of that well, if you've maybe located it in the past, you've written down that API number, that's another real quick way to hone in on that particular well. So that is one thing you'll see here at the top, the API number. It'll tell you the status of the wellbore, whether it's open, whether it's plugged, the last permit operator, the total depth. Again, it'll have the legal description for that well, what survey block section. It has the abstract number, which is A112 in this case. So this would be a number that you'd want to write down so that you could easily find this in the future without having to enter the survey, the block, and the section. You can just enter the A112. I'll just show you that here real quick. And within that county, abstract A112, and it takes me to that same section. So that's another way to really quickly and easily identify your piece of property on the map. Justin, what kind of questions can I answer by using the Texas Railroad Commission website? Tell me a little bit about how you've used it in the past.
Yep, absolutely. So there's a lot of important filings that are linked on this Railroad Commission, and things like production information. You can get to drilling permits. You can get to the archives that contain some of the notices, completion notices, and the dates they were completed. And importantly, Matt, that is the well plats. You're able to see exactly where this well is going, where is the drill site, where are the minerals being taken from. And that information is hugely valuable when you're trying to determine what you own and then what percentage you own as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in order to find that, when you click on the well, you'll see links to those things that Justin mentioned, whether it's well logs, which is just a record of the actual measurements they took through the wellbore. Now, most mineral owners, it's going to be like reading Greek. And so that is not going to be particularly useful, but it does tell you things like the zones that maybe had shown more potential for oil to be there versus water, things like that. Those are the types of things you can see from reading a log. But like Justin said, the drilling permit is something that's really useful. You can see the dates that it was submitted, when it was approved, the lease name. And if you click on that lease name link, it'll tell you some specific dates that you can be aware of. And it'll tell you if it's been completed. It'll say final completion. It'll have the spud date, which was the date that the well first started drilling, tell you when the drilling was completed, and then when surface casing was set, and then the completion date. And so this will be really useful in knowing that, okay, that well has been completed. And, for example, let's say that we recently inherited minerals. It's 2022 and we haven't received any royalties yet, but we noticed that this well was drilled on our mineral tract and it was just completed. And now that tells me that the clock is now ticking for me to look out for a division order, and more information about what a division order is, again, in that mineral management basics course, if that's a new term for you. But then to know when you can start to receive royalties. And so that's an important date to be aware of. Some of the other useful information, again, the acres that the lease comprises and the depth. And so again, if you have an oil and gas lease that maybe has a depth restriction in it, it'll tell you whether or not this well is part of that or not. It'll tell you the formation that it's producing from. In this one, it looks like it is going to commingle multiple formations. Looks like this is a vertical well that's going through the Fusselman, the Strawn, and the Sprayberry. And I can look through, like Justin said, and look at the plat. You'll see the area that the lease, and in this case, it looks like it's the southwest quarter of this particular section 27, 160 acres. And again, you have a full legal description here on this particular section, this Block 33, T2 South, T&P Railroad Company survey, Glasscock County, Texas, and the actual surface location of the well, bottom hole location, and the legend of on this particular plat, which again, it shows the unit boundary and the location of the wells, how long that lateral is or that directional portion of the well. So all of this is super useful in identifying, for example, if we had minerals in the northwest quarter of this section up here, well, we wouldn't have an interest in this well, right? Because our minerals would be outside the boundary of this lease. And so that's really important, Justin. I think when you're looking at the plat, it'll really tell you whether or not you should have an interest in a well.
You nailed it, Matt. And, I recently learned this lesson hard with a scenario where the unit was on the boundaries of where my minerals are. However, the first take point for the minerals was not within that boundary. And just looking at that GIS, you can make assumptions, but it really isn't telling you the exact details about what's going on as far as the wellbore goes if you're a mineral rights owner.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that last take point, and we'll show that on a horizontal well here just a second. So again, for this particular well that we're looking at, this directional well, like Justin mentioned there, they have image records. And so this would be scanned images that you can look at here. And in this case, the completion record, it has the company that is transporting the oil and gas. So they'll have like a midstream company name here. And these are, I guess, somewhat useful if you need to know who the gas purchaser is or who the oil purchaser is. And so there's just some basic information. And this is a newer well. So most of the stuff is found in the permit record here. On older wells that maybe don't have electronic copies of some of these documents, you can find copies of the well permit and things like that in those records for that well or for that lease. And so the other thing that's important to notice is the lease ID within Texas, because Texas is unique in that, they may have different lease numbers, and you can, if you have an interest in one particular lease, you can pretty quickly see all the wells that are part of that lease that are grouped together. So those are the wells that you should be getting paid on if you're getting paid from, one well in that particular lease. Another thing that you can look at is for these horizontal wells. Let's say we have, again, interest in, let's say, northwest quarter of section 27. We want to know these 3 black lines represent the wellbores of a horizontal well. In this case, 3 horizontal wells that have been permitted. And we can hover our mouse over it and see that it's a permitted location. This is the Hairball E2HD well. And so just a side note, is, companies come up with crazy names for these wells. A lot of times it could reflect the surface owner's name, or maybe they have like a theme in a particular area. I was doing work for a client in the Eagleford, and some of the leases were named after San Antonio Spurs players. So that was kind of cool. Or you can see like band names or rock stars, things like that. So it's, they just look for any kind of inspiration. It doesn't have to be within oil and gas. In this case, let's say we had an interest in this section 27. We want to know if this Hairball E well is going to pull from the oil and gas reserves under our minerals. In this case, we're looking at the lease plat. And good news is, if we had interest in the northwest quarter, which is part of tract 1 here, which in fact they're calling this the whole north half of that section. But again, we would be looking to see in a horizontal well situation where the penetration point is, or the PP, and where the first take point is, FTP, and the last take point, the LTP. And this horizontal distance between the FTP and the LTP is where they're actually going to be producing oil and gas from. And so that is the lateral length. That's the productive portion of the lateral length. In other words, that's the portion of the well that they're actually completing and hydraulically fracturing the formation, perforating the casing, et cetera, and producing the oil and gas there. So that would tell me that as a mineral owner under this portion of tract 1, we would have an interest in this new Hairball well. And you can add up the tract acreages to figure out what the total acreage is for that lease, or you can look on the well permit. It'll tell you that as well. And in this case, if this were not pooled, so in other words, let's say that there are multiple tracts that this is going through, in order to determine what our share of the production should be, of course, it depends on the net acreage we own, but then also how much of that productive lateral length goes through our mineral tract to determine what our fraction of the royalties will be. So a lot of useful information on this.
And that's something that, I think is really important that we check that. I learned that lesson hard again, but it can be a little deceiving if we're just looking at the GIS. So your next step should really be to dive into this plat map.
Yeah, that's a great point. So again, let's say that we're back here on this well. We want to look at the drilling permit again. And I want to look at the actual permit itself. So we can tell on the permit here that it's going through the Sprayberry, and that's the main formation. The lease acreage is 1,262.2, which again, like I said, you can either add up all those different tract acreages, or you can just look here and it'll tell you the total acreage. So we had an interest in 160 acres in the northwest quarter out of the 1,262.2, but then also we need to know of the lateral length, how much actually goes through our tract if this weren't pooled together. And you can tell that because it would say on the drilling permit that this is an allocation well. If it were, so here, this tells me that this is something where they're going to allocate production to each of the mineral owners, again, based on the amount that lateral length goes through. Now, if this were pooled, it would indicate that, and there would be also more information here in some of these other documents as far as the actual acreage designation and the different tracks, who gets what sort of a thing. In this case, it looks like each of those 314.9 acre tracts are pretty much proportionally going to be receiving proceeds from production from this. This is a P16 or acreage designation. It sort of tells the different tracts that are contributing to the lease. But again, this is useful because it tells me I know now that Crown Quest might be drilling the well in the next year or so. We're recording this in November of 2023. So this tells me I have roughly another year or so to kind of be on the lookout for when they spud this well. And if you want to find out more, what you would need to do is contact Crown Quest Operating, their owner relations department, and ask them, hey, I have an interest in this Hairball E 2HD well, and I want to know what is your approximate plans for drilling that particular well. They might tell you, well, yeah, we have it on the schedule to drill in the fourth quarter of 2024. Or they might say, yeah, we are planning to drill in 2025. And so that'll tell you they're actually going to probably let this permit expire, and then they'll renew it. They'll submit an application to extend the permit, to renew it, and then they'll drill it after when this permit expires. So they'll sometimes be willing to tell you some basic information about their plans, but this drilling permit is a critical piece of information. If you own an interest in a well and you want to verify that you're getting paid correctly, Justin, you want to walk through a little bit how you would use this type of information to figure out your decimal interest in that well and sort of how you would, glean that information.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So once you're able to kind of look this information up, and I think something worth mentioning is this information exists historically for wells that are also in production. And so even if you've got a well that is producing and you're trying to go back and figure out this information, you're really taking a look at your plat, and then the title work that you'll need to do in the county where this well resides will help lead you to what percentage of a lease that you have, if it's an overriding royalty, what percentage of overriding royalty or decimal interest is. And Matt, that will lead you to be able to do those calculations for figuring out what your decimal interest is. And Matt, as you mentioned, you should really reach out to the operator, and you should have a division order coming where the next step would be to ensure that that decimal interest they are saying that you own is accurate. And Matt, again, can't say enough. If you don't know the basics of minerals management, going through Matt's course will kind of give you that information you need to be able to do those calculations.
Well, thanks for the plug there on the course. But yeah, no, definitely important to know how to navigate the Texas Railroad Commission website if you own mineral rights or royalties in Texas. Like Justin said, those are some of the questions you can answer by using this information. And you have to use this type of information to figure out what you would own in that particular well. And then from that information, you can calculate what your decimal interest should be in those wells. And then another question I know that we've talked about, Justin, is whether or not an overriding royalty interest is still actually active and it still is something where you should be looking to be receiving royalties from that. And especially if you've inherited an override and you really don't know the history of it, you'd have to be able to walk through using the Texas Railroad Commission website, again, identify where that overriding royalty interest is located, and then, whether or not you should still have an interest in it. So let's say hypothetically, we had an overriding royalty in the lease that covered the northwest quarter of Section 27. What I would need to know is when that lease were signed, when it was actually active, and whether or not a well capable of production had existed continuously since that time period, or at least since the primary term of that lease were still active. So for example, if we had a lease that was from, let's say 2010, and it was a 3-year lease, this well that was drilled in 2011 would have held that lease by production. In other words, it would have extended that lease into the secondary term. And so if we had an override in that section, again, that was carved out of a lease that was signed in 2010, that means that our overriding royalty interest should still be in effect. And again, you'd want to have a copy of the lease and the assignment documents just to see the exact wording. But just in general, using the information like the dates here, that's where it becomes really important, because then we can see that this well was spud in October of 2011. It was completed as well in October, and it appears to still be producing. And we can do the production data query, which is another way that we can look at. And you may have to go back and enter, I'll just say, 2011. Well, this looks like they started producing and selling oil in April of 2012, and we should have been receiving royalties, or our ancestors should have been receiving royalties from that override from that period. And if we just recently inherited that, we would be looking for information that, this well is still producing and who the current operator is. And if you're not receiving royalty checks, this would be an indication that you should reach out to that operator to let them know that you inherited that. You would have to provide a copy of the assignment document, maybe probate records, things like that, to get the interest transferred over to you in their system so they can start issuing royalty checks. So those are important pieces of information. You can find out whether it's, again, the Texas Railroad Commission website like we're showing in this demo, or any other state oil and gas commission, the same steps you would need to be followed to figure out, whether or not you should be being paid on that overriding royalty.
Absolutely, Matt. And, we're talking a lot in the context of drilling permits and managing your minerals and watching for new activity. But this is also extremely valuable with one of the other most common questions we get, and that is, am I being paid correctly? And so if you are receiving royalties and you're wanting to look at production, what Matt's looking at right now is the production that was reported to the state. And Matt, we've often talked about how this is the resource that we're going to compare those numbers to see if our numbers are off. And so this is a really useful tool, even outside of just watching for new activity.
That's a great point. If you're wanting to do an audit of your royalties and make sure that you're getting paid correctly each month, the way that you would check the production volumes on a well in Texas and the actual sales volumes, which is what you're getting paid on, you'd have to look at the disposition column here. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm looking at the production and total disposition tab. So if I just click on the production data query, it'll pull this up for that lease. And the important thing to note is that generally speaking, production is reported at the lease level within Texas. So that means you may have multiple wells that actually make up the numbers that are reported here for that lease. And so if your royalty statement splits it up by well, you may have to add those up in order to get that to match. But what you're looking for is the disposition column here, which just tells me what the actual sales volumes are. And so if I look at April of 2012, this well produced 1,990 barrels of oil and 1,905 were sold that month. And so that 1905 would be the number I'd be looking for on my royalty check, where I'm looking for production for the month of April 2012, trying to match those up and make sure that I got paid for the right volume, whether it's oil or gas. They have those both numbers there. And then if you want to know exactly how they got that oil to market, you can click on the disposition details and it will tell you the code. In this case, the code number 1 was 1905, and then the rest of it was zeros. And I can look at the actual codes here on the right. There's disposition codes, and it'll tell me that for crude oil, 1 was trucked. So they actually trucked that oil off of the lease location and sold it that way. So if there was a pipeline, it might show up under the pipeline column, which is 0. Or, there's other disposition codes here that you can look at, and you can see how the actual oil or gas was sold. So useful information there to figure out, for gas, this was 3. This tells me it was delivered to the processing plant. Now, the one thing to know with natural gas, and this is true for pretty much every state, is that in general, this is the total wet gas volume. So in other words, it includes natural gas liquids. When they actually get the plant statement, they are going to issue your royalty check based on the dry gas volume and then natural gas liquids or plant products. And so they're going to break down the different products that were actually extracted from that gas stream. And that will not match what's showing up on the Railroad Commission website. Again, unless that gas is pretty much pipeline quality coming out of the wellhead. In other words, it doesn't have a lot of natural gas liquids. A lot of times these numbers will be different than what you would see on your royalty statement. You would have a certain amount of shrinkage. In other words, the volume of gas would be less than what's shown on the Railroad Commission website. So just keep that in mind. Now, for oil, it's very useful, but for gas, you can just get a general approximation of how much was produced. Unfortunately, it's hard to hone in on the exact number without more information.
You said about, and in Texas, this website is just such a great resource and kind of the Bible for researching your mineral rights, production, drilling permits, pretty much anything to do with the process of drilling those wells. And each state, Matt, has a regulatory entity that keeps up with this information. Some offer more available to users on the end user side. Some offer less. But these tools are extremely valuable to really get an idea of what's going on and what's going to happen with your minerals.
Absolutely. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you're notified when more content like this comes out. And also, if you have a request for a specific state you would like us to cover, please send an email to feedback@mineralrightspodcast.com and we'll put it in the queue a little bit earlier in the queue for you. We do plan on covering different states like Oklahoma, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah. But if you have another state that you'd like us to cover, reach out and let us know and we'll make sure to cover it for you. So again, stay tuned. If we haven't covered your state yet, it'll be coming. Again, we're going to plan on covering most of the major oil and gas producing states so that this information is available for you to have a quick reference on how to navigate the Oil and Gas Commission website. And then for those that we don't cover, we'll do a special episode using a software that I use for my business, which actually has oil and gas information available for you to view in all states across the United States. And they have a free plan that you can use. And so we'll cover more about that in a future episode. So again, make sure you're subscribed and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.